I met a guy who had been traveling Australia with a couple friends. Hitchhiking around as many of us had done. One of his friend told him they were near his distant uncle's house, whom he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member, and as they had hoped, the uncle offered them a place to stay. He picked them up in town and drove them out to his rural property way out in the bush. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to set up a place to sleep, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of sleeping bags and bed rolls. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kit and set up on the living room floor. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened. And afterwards the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later that man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhiking backpackers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me the story was 100% certain he had slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims. There have been several confirmed cases in a few different countries of people living in other people's houses unbeknownst to them. I believe one case went on for a couple of years. The intruder would wait until the homeowner would go to work and then sneak out and steal small amounts of food as not to be noticed. Well, eventually the homeowner did notice and couldn't figure out where his food was going. So he set up a hidden camera to record it. I can only imagine how scary it would have been to come home from work one night and sit down to watch the video. Skipping through hours of stillness, to suddenly come across a person crawling out of your attic. And then the slow realization that that person is still in your house at that moment. And then the retroactive fear of thinking back to all the times you laid awake at night and heard a noise, which you just dismissed as coming from the pipes or the old wooden beams. But actually it was a fucking person just above you. It gives me the heebie-jeebies every time I think about it. The Reina Marroquin story, https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/murder_of_Reina_Marrochu% C3% ADN, / A young lady had an affair with her boss in the 1960s. Got pregnant. After threatening to tell her boss wife, she was killed by her boss, who then put her body in an industrial barrel. He hid the barrel in his house for years and none of the various owners opened it due to the weight. Finally one guy decided to dispose of it in the 90s, and when he opened it he saw it contained something. An investigation traced the barrel and girl back to the man, who then killed himself before police could come arrest him after confirming he was the father of the unborn baby via DNA. The lady's mother was in her late 80s when she was told her missing daughter was finally found. She claims that she had been having dreams about her daughter being inside a metal container for years after she had gone missing. I was in CLSS in 10th grade and the teacher was asking everyone how their weekend was. The quietest girl in the CLSS spoke, and while breaking down in tears said she was on a trip in the mountains with her mom. They made a stop for some reason and she looked over the cliff and saw an overturned vehicle with a dead family scattered about. The Lake Bodom murders are scary as hell. There are 4 teens who go on a camping trip in Finland. The next morning, 3 of the teens are found murdered. And one of them is almost dead and severely injured, but survived. No one knows who the murderers are today. 44 years later, the 4th teen, Nils, who survived, was accused of murdering them and get sent to prison. But then he was released a year later. Because there was little DNA evidence to prove this. And no good evidence to prove that he murdered them at all. However, there is circumstantial evidence such as he allegedly fought his one friend due to an argument and was drunk. Some say this could have ended in accidental and/or intentional murder. However, I personally highly doubt that Nils is guilty. Some other key suspects include the manager of the camp, who was known for being quite hostile, and an ice cream vendor who admitted to the crime on his deathbed. There was a sketch released of the alleged murderer, who seems to be an unsettling picture of an older man. I added some information that I missed from this case based on the replies to this. Much thanks to everyone for adding more info. Co-worker's dad was babysitting his baby boy for him. At one point, Granddad went into the nursery to check on the baby and found that he'd somehow reached for the window blind strap and tangled himself up in it to the point where he was choking. Baby was already blue and all of the veins in his face had popped. Grandpa called 911 and frantically dialed 911. EMS was there in 2 to 3 minutes and they brought the little fellow back to life and he's okay now. One I've seen. Shitty teenagers threw a rock into traffic. Smashes the windshield of a nice car. Driver loses control and kills a pedestrian while skidding on ice. Lived W3 other girls sophomore year of college. All three took off early for spring break, leaving me alone in the house. First night alone. I heard someone bang on my front door at 2 a.m. Then I hear more knocks at the back door. A man yells Boulder police. Open the door. When I didn't, I heard body slams against both doors. Soon I hear little girl. Open the door. We know you're alone. At this point I'm so scared I keep accidentally dialing 611 instead of 911. When I eventually do get the police, cars roll up, thankfully, just minutes later. Officers have 4 boys from our school hockey team face down on the GRSS. I had to file arrest-ringing orders against them and the kicker. One lived across the street from me and we'd never spoken a single word before then. When I was about 8 years old our school was doing swimming lessons as part of the curriculum. My mum worked late, so we went to after-school care and didn't get home until after dark. When we got home Mum asked me to take my wet togs, bathing suit, and towel out to the clothesline to dry so I could use them the next day. I was so confident going outside to do this and had this real feeling of being a big kid. I walked into our backyard, only for a man to be running at me. I screamed, jumped inside and instinctively locked the back door as I did so. As this was happening, my mum told me she heard the guy jump the gate which was next to her bedroom just after she heard me scream and came running to find me. I slept with the light on until I was 16 and I get my husband to go outside for me while it's dark. I am not sure I remember all the details correctly but anyway. A guy was cleaning a giant cooking tank at a tuna factory. It was so big that he had to climb all the way in. Someone else didn't check and protocol was broken along the way somewhere. Second guy locked the barrel and turned it on, cooking the guy inside alive. One of my friends was drugged by a nice-seeming girl at a bar that tried to traffic her. the girl got her an Uber to an address she didn't know under the guise of "get my drunk friend home," but she woke up on the way and told the driver she didn't know where they were going. They called the cops. Apparently that wasn't the first time that week they'd heard the same story, and they recognized the address as one they were already tracking. If she hadn't woken up on the way, she might have been trafficked by now. Apparently they use younger, safe-seeming girls to do the collecting a lot of the time. Back in the 70s, some friends and I planned a camping trip to Northern Cali for a long weekend. We packed up and headed north on the highway. Somewhere around Bakersfield we picked up a hitchhiker headed to Kernville, who we dropped off before heading further north. So we get to our campsite and start getting things set up. My GF finds a note tucked into the top of her backpack. It read, "I could have killed all of you. None of us slept that night. My mother never taught me to swim because when she was a teenager she saw a friend get sucked into a whirlpool at the bottom of a drainage lake that is the deepest body of water within a few hundred miles of us. They didn't find his body for days. My baby's crib caught fire in the middle of the night. Some people's literal worst nightmare. Edit. My baby was in it and he was severely burnt and spent a month intubated and in a medically induced coma. He is 5 now and is okay though. The fire was a freak accident. His humidifier caught fire, smoldered for a little while and drained the oxygen in the room before the smoke alarm went off. When we opened the door to his room it flooded with oxygen, creating a backdraft and launched a fireball at his crib. This was his crib the next day. https://imager.com/a/2tjobdu https://imager.com/a/2tjwvdu. One of my dad's friend's wife was murdered by some crazy dude walking down the street. This guy had just been released from a mental hospital and literally just stabbed her as she walked home. When my dad's friend came back he thought she had just taken the dogs out for a walk, so he walked along the normal walk route and he saw loads of blue lights. He was stopped by a police officer and wasn't allowed any closer until he saw that it was his wife. My mom's best friend was murdered by a man because she broke up with him. When I was young, I saw a documentary about a guy who got flesh-eating bacteria in his nasal cavity. It ate his face and he's still alive. Eventually they removed the bacteria by removing the eaten parts of his face. He got a prosthetic face, which back in those days was basically a plastic Halloween mask that tried to look human. At the end of the documentary, he took the mask off. His face from his forehead down to his mouth was just a hole. I had an associate that was a fireman. He had to go find the head of his brother-in-law after a car accident. Then he had to console his sister when she heard. Tough bloke. Can you imagine that being your day? Not the scariest one I've heard, but one of the scariest things to happen to me, also in my post history in r/let's not meet. A few years ago I was living in a big city. Didn't know anyone. A guy I was seeing came, from abroad, to visit me. At the end of his trip I accompanied him to his train home. After that I went back into the metro to go home. It was about 2 p.m. Very bright and sunny outside. I sat down on a bench near a man. We made eye contact and I said hello. He said hello back. I felt like something was off but tried to ignore it. The metro car came and we both got inside. It was crowded. I took a seat. He took one of the only available ones, which was right across from me. I started thinking I was overreacting since he started talking to a man near me. Seemed like they knew each other. His friend got off after a few stops, but he stayed. Once I saw my own stop approaching to change lines, I got up. He got up too and was right behind me. I could see his reflection in the metro car window, and he was very slowly looking my legs up and down. I started to feel very uneasy. The doors open. We get off. I start walking quickly to the end of the platform, then realize he might be following me. There were several entrances/exits around, so I suddenly changed direction to go to another exit. He changed course as well. Then I turned around again. He followed. I did this a few times and he changed his path to match mine each time. Fuck. Eventually I knew I had to leave somehow so he wouldn't catch up, so I went to the exit I needed to take to change lines and go home. Unfortunately, the passageway to the next line was flooded with people, so I was slowed down. He caught up with me and started crowding me in, getting closer and closer to me. I was backed up against a wall at this point. Him just smiling brightly at me. "Hello. How are you?" he asked me, still inching towards me. I was terrified at this point. No one stopped to even glance at us, so I knew unless I did something myself I wouldn't get away from him. I glanced to the right and saw a staircase downwards. Without warning, I sprinted away to the stairs. He was very caught off guard, and it took him 2 or 3 seconds to start following me. I flew down the stairs and straight into a metro car. I turned around to see if he was close behind. He was sprinting down the stairs as well. Thankfully, the doors closed before he could get to the bottom and we pulled away. Surprisingly, I had gotten onto the right metro line and direction to go home. Not that it mattered much to me at the time. That incident and several others of men following me home or in the street make me paranoid when I walk outside alone. There was a man who got out of his car after it broke down on the highway and attempted to walk across the highway to the other side late at night. He was hit by a car and his body was driven over so many times that by the time the sun came up his body parts were scattered across 300 m of highway. When I worked in healthcare, I had a patient who got a sinus infection. He stopped taking his antibiotics after a few days because he felt better. His sinus infection came back with a vengeance. When he got to the emergency department, he was presenting with stroke symptoms. The infection had spread to his cranial cavity. There was so much pus that it was twisting his brain. No one thought he would survive the surgery. The family was advised to expect the worst. Amazingly, he actually survived. He ended up needing 3 more surgeries to wash out and spent almost 2 months in the hospital. Take your full dose of antibiotics. People. My friends and I were drinking one night and going around asking, "Hey, whatever happened to \_____________________________________________________________________________________________________________________:__ In this case, a guy a few of us used to have an aid period with in high school. Nice kid. Googled him. I've found a few sad results playing this game in the past, and there were a couple appellate court decisions visible in first few results. Turns out he went to Afghanistan. Got extremely fucked up in combat. Court notes said he saw things there that completely undid him. basically, and came home with PTSD and delusional schizophrenia. Once home, he apparently has been on a mission to kill his mother to save her from demons and send her to heaven. He's tried and failed numerous times. Apparently. It's not just that A-B plot though. It's all the surround. We looked up his social media accounts then and it's just threads and threads of manic rambling about demons. It was sad to find this, and not the only time I've found a former classmate lost his/her mind. Unfortunately. But also terrifying to think you could be normal. Then through one set of circumstances or another, become completely insane within a few years. I don't know if this will seem that scary to y'all. But one time when I was about 16 I was at a laundromat with a friend in her neighborhood. I wasn't as familiar with the neighborhood. I was just there to hang out with her. We start walking inside and there's this man standing outside his car, seemingly looking for something. He was a bit older. My friend walked right past them without giving them a single glance. But he caught me looking and asked, "Will you come help me find my phone? I dropped it down here somewhere and I can't find it." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I looked into the car and noticed a second man in the car staring dead at me. I'll never forget the way he looked at me. I immediately snapped my head away and followed my friend inside. When we got inside, she told me that those men were known traffickers and that was one of their ploys. I was shaken up because if I had been a little younger and a little dumber, I don't know if I would have seen the second man in the car. I think I might have helped the old man. My dad knew a war vet who served in the Middle East. And one day he is at a bar and a drunk dude accused him of flirting with his wife and proceeded to start throwing punches. The vet returns the hits and then pulls a knife and slashes the man and gets behind him and nearly completely decapitates him right there in front of everybody. He picks up his stuff and leaves go home, and when the police arrive some time later they find him with a bucket of KFC eating at his kitchen table. He got off with self-defense. I was in the drunk tank with a guy who beat another man to death. The guy didn't die immediately. Was in intensive care for 3 days then died in the hospital. The man who killed him told me specific details about it, and on the 3rd day, when the guy in IC died, the co's came in the cell and put him in isolation across the hall. They left him in general pop until the guy actually died, and once he was officially charged with capital murder then they took him out of our cell. I was 17 at the time. Never forget being scared to fall asleep right next to this dude. I had the most likable stepfather at the time. Would treat me really well. We would rent movies and plenty of nice activities for a 10-year-old boy. Until he cheated on my pregnant mother and she broke up. He threatened her. But from what I recall she didn't took it too seriously. He waited for us one night hiding in our apartment. Luckily for me I had stayed at my grandmother's place to sleep. He tied her up, raped and killed her. The baby did not survive. During trial he said he would have killed me too. After years I got more details of fuck stuff he had done. Like being abusive mentally and physically. But I couldn't see it as a kid. Didn't have contact with him for 17 years. From what I heard he got out of prison a couple of months ago. I have no idea if he still want me dead or not. I want to move out to somewhere else. I've been living in the same neighborhood all my life. But can't afford it right now. So I'm trying to be extremely careful and hoping for the best. My best friend and someone I've known since I was in kindergarten was at Santa Barbara during the shooting. His friend and roommate was gunned down in front of him. I'm not sure how he survived. I remember the feeling of horror when I stumbled upon the live thread that morning. Just this feeling of being useless, you know something is happen and your best friend is in danger and there's nothing you can do because he's so far away. I'm so glad he survived, but it still must haunt him. When he came back home afterward, he immediately came to my place and asked my family if he learned to use our pistol and rifle. Only family around he know that had firearms. I don't, maybe it was a coping thing. Apparently he goes hunting now. Bachelor's in microbiology and he goes hunting, takes all sorts. I'm proud of him though. Only guy I know from my hometown to make it through college. Most of what happened to those who died at Chernobyl qualify. But that's a familiar one. A more obscure source of horror is that the drugs that stop you from moving during surgery and the ones that stop you from feeling pain are often separate chemicals. There have been cases where the sedatives wore off during surgery, but the chemicals paralyzing the body were still active. So they were fully conscious while being operated on, but unable to move or show that they were in pain. Sweet dreams. I was robbed at gunpoint in front of my house. He had the gun pressed into the back of my head. He took my money and jewelry and took off. He was arrested an hour later. I think the whole 9/11 incident, being above the impacted floors, and seeing those people at the broken windows, looking out, all strangely calm, I'd be waving a white cloth and freaking out. To me, that was absolutely scary as it unfolded live on TV.